There are crimes that explode into history. Murders that become legends. Disappearances that never leave the news. And then there are crimes that barely leave a mark. They happen. They end. And somehow, life continues. This is the kind of story that doesn't scream. It whispers. And it has followed me my entire life. The story I grew up with, I was a child when I first heard it. Not as a warning, not as a lesson, but as an anecdote. 50 years ago, on Long Island, my father's friend was kidnapped. Taken at gunpoint, in broad daylight. Men with guns. A car. A moment that should have shattered everything. And yet, the story was told calmly, as if it were weather, as if it were traffic. He was taken. He was held. He was released. And then, he went on with his life. That part, that is what haunts me. Long Island in the 1970s wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It was lawns and driveways. Family dinners, neighbors who waved. Crime happened elsewhere. In cities. In movies. So, when it happened here, it felt unreal. A man leaving work. A routine day, and then guns. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just force. He was pushed into a car. The door slammed shut. And the world kept moving. Traffic lights changed. People went home for dinner. Somewhere, a man disappeared. No dramatic chase. No heroics. Just fear. Fear that settles into your bones when you realize no one is coming. He didn't know where they were taking him. Didn't know how long it would last. Minutes stretch. Hours dissolve. Time becomes meaningless. There are sounds you never forget. The click of a gun. The engine idling. The voice of someone who knows they have power over you. And then waiting. This is the part people skip. The part no one wants to imagine. What happens inside a kidnapping? Not the headlines. Not the ransom. But the mind. What do you think about when you don't know if you'll live? Do you think about your children? Your regrets? Your unfinished sentences? Or do you go blank because blank is safer? No one asked him these questions. No one wanted the answers. Eventually, he came back. Alive. Physically intact. He walked back into his life. Same job. Same neighborhood. Same routines. No parade. No therapy. No language for what had happened. People shook his hand. Said things like, "You're lucky. At least it ended. Thank God." And then they expected him to be the same man. He didn't become bitter. He didn't fall apart. He didn't talk about it much at all. He went to work. Paid his bills. Raised his family. He survived. And that is what disturbs me most. Because we expect trauma to leave visible scars. We want it to announce itself. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just sinks in quietly and rearranges a life from the inside. No one sat him down and said, "Tell us what it did to you." Silence was the price of normalcy. Talking about it would have made it real. And reality was inconvenient. So the kidnapping became a story told at a distance. A thing that happened, not a thing that changed someone. But how could it not? Trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it shows up as caution, as control, as emotional restraint. Sometimes it becomes humor, or discipline, or perfection. Sometimes it just becomes life. And that's the most frightening version of all. Because it means you can live with terror inside you and no one will ever know. I didn't experience the kidnapping, but I grew up in its shadow. I learned something without being taught. That terrible things can happen, and the world will still expect you to show up the next day. That survival doesn't come with an explanation. That endurance is often mistaken for healing. And that silence is not the same as peace. We love stories where people overcome, where pain has an arc, a lesson, a conclusion. But some experiences don't resolve. They don't end. They simply become part of you. And the idea that someone can be kidnapped at gunpoint and then just move on, it unsettles us because it suggests something terrifying, that we are capable of absorbing almost anything. And calling it normal? Maybe he didn't talk about it because there was no language for it. Maybe because men weren't supposed to. Maybe because survival felt like enough. Or maybe because revisiting it would have meant reliving it. And he had already paid that price once. The kidnapping ended that day, but it didn't really end. It lived on in habits, in silences, in the way he moved through the world. And it lived on in me as a question I can't stop asking. What happens to the parts of us that survive, but are never acknowledged? 50 years ago, a man was taken at gunpoint on Long Island. He came back. He lived his life. And that is the part that haunts me, because it tells me something I don't want to know. That sometimes the most traumatic events don't destroy us. They simply ask us to carry them forever.